What's up, my bookish dweebs? I read 6 books in October, and there were some fantastic ones, some brilliant ones, some short ones, some long ones, some dull ones, some interesting ones, some ones I would recommend, some ones I would not recommend. But I'm glad I read all of them in some way, because, you know, some books are kind of like a learning experience. You're like, okay, I don't really want to read a book like that anymore. But also there are some other books that are like, okay, I've never read a book like that before, and that was brilliant. So we're going to go through the 6 books I read in September, I think, because we're now in October, which is crazy. We're now in like Halloween spooky season, and I'm not a big Halloween person. I think it's because I'm not American or like a 15-year-old girl, but either way, not a big Halloween person. Christmas though, I can get behind, because that's all about family and eating, and they're my sort of things. Anyway, this is a bookish YouTube channel, not a Christmas YouTube channel. So let's get into the 6 books I read in September. I may have said October at some point, I don't know. So the first book I read, by the way, apologies if you can see sweat sheening off my forehead. It is very hot outside right now. I've got all of my windows closed because I don't like my neighbours to be able to hear me recording these. Anyway, was The Empire of Silence by Christopher Roadshow. Now, for some reason, I stuck the bookmark in the start of this. I did actually read this book, and please don't think I didn't read the book. We'll just place that here. Empire of Silence by Christopher Roadshow has been on my TBR for a long time. I've been wanting to read this book for, I would say, years now, actually. It's one of those books that's been on my Amazon TBR for a very long time. So finally picking up was really exciting. One of those books where I know I'm going to get really into like the lore and the nerdiness, and fantasy books, I think, especially slightly thicker fantasy books, are books that I get really interested into reading. Empire of Silence was good. Wasn't stunning. I can see why people love it, and I think the sequels make up for what is maybe lacking in this one. So the general idea here is that we have a kind of prince of a lord. I don't quite get the hierarchy of things, but basically the son of a very powerful man. One day the son finds out that his dad is not going to be giving him any sort of power. In fact, he's going to give it to his brother, who is, some would argue, the lesser brother in a lot of aspects. However, is more ruthless and thus is more likely to have the power. So what eventually ends up happening is, I think the kind of young person, our main character here, Hadrian, who is quite rebellious, does something to rebel, and eventually has to then be kicked off the world, and he's sent off to this other place where he then has to just kind of fight his way through, earn his way back up, but hide his identity, because if he was told people about his identity, people would come after him and not like him a lot. So that's basically what the book is about. Now, in my opinion, it's a very slow book. I was very underwhelmed by a lot of it. There is great moments in this. There are some really fast action plots. I think a lot of it is quite philosophical. I think the reason it's slower is because it wants you to think about things. It's not that it's dull. It's not that there isn't a lot going on. It just isn't a sort of book where it's full-paced action all the time. In fact, even the bits with action aren't particularly large, aren't particularly grand. The idea of this is supposed to be like a space epic. It's supposed to be some sort of space opera, that sort of thing, and it's not that big and grand, unfortunately. I know in the sequels, or from what I've read about other people in the sequels, having read the sequels, sorry, is that it does get more grand. It does get more space opera-y. There is more sci-fi to it. There is more action, that sort of thing. With the third book, I think, being absolutely fantastic. So it's a series I do want to persist with, and it's a series I do want to pick up the second book of. However, this first one wasn't a massive leap into it. It wasn't like I was left with this one blown away. You know how some kind of, often the first book in a series is like, oh my god, I must read the rest of this series. This wouldn't do that, especially for me, but having heard how good, as I said, the sequels are, that's what's probably going to make me want to read them. As I said though, I wouldn't say it's bad. I enjoyed my time with it. There were just moments where I felt like not a lot's happened recently. I've been listening. I did a lot of this on audiobook, obviously. A lot of listening recently, and not a lot has happened, unfortunately. There's a lot of kind of internal character stuff going on here, and there's some great character work here. In fact, if I were to write a review, I'd probably give it a very high score on the character scale. The main character, Hadrian, is very complex. He's got humor, he has faults, he has lots of thoughts about things, he is intelligent in the way that he works, so I was a big fan of that. And also Christopher Roadshow's writing is very, very impressive. I'm not sure if this was 100% a debut novel. I don't know. If it was, even more impressive that this is the first book he ever wrote. Very, very good in terms of the language and things like that used. As you can see, I'm not particularly good at articulating how well books are written because I'm not a man of a vast vocabulary. Either way, Empire of Silence by Christopher Roadshow was a good book. I would probably give this a 4.25 or 4.5 out of 5 stars, which I know people don't understand my rating system. Nothing goes below a 3.25, nothing goes above a 4.75. I will often call a book very average and then give it a 4.25. And I'll also say I really enjoyed a book and give it a 4.25. There's not much logic to my system. Either way, I enjoyed it. So if you're looking to get into this book and you've heard about it, do get into it, do try it, but do be aware that I think the sequels are better than this. The next book I read was The God of the Woods. Now, this was very underwhelming. This is a book that I honestly cannot remember ordering. I think at some point somebody said to me, this book is great, Luke, you should order it. So I went onto Amazon, I pre-ordered it because I saw the paperback was coming out, and then it arrived one day and I was like, I do not remember for the life of me ordering this book, but I did, and I read it, and as I said, it was very underwhelming. Basically, the idea here is that two girls go missing at a camp, or two people go missing at a camp, and it tells the story leading up to the event of the missing and post the missing and the kind of crime and the police aspect and finding these people. Now, it's not your typical crime in that there are police and it's all very kind of high intensity things being unveiled. It feels a little bit more kind of like backcountry, out in the sticks sort of stories where you find out more about the families, and then this builds up to the big reveal at the end as to what actually happened and why these children aren't around anymore. And that's basically what happens throughout the book. I've not explained that particularly well because it's difficult to explain it without giving away the general plot of things. But my general summary is it just felt very, very slow. I had a conversation with somebody over on Instagram who was reading the book just before I started reading it. I asked, is it worth my time? And they said, I don't think it is. Because they, similar to my experience, were reading the book continuously and then got to a point where they were like, nothing vastly is happening. A lot of things are kind of being talked about. People are being introduced. They're going around town having conversations with people. But in a book, you can't just kind of live life. You can't just kind of talk about people and go into a town and, you know, have conversations and things. Things need to be unveiled. Action needs to happen. Plot needs to happen. Things need to happen. And unfortunately, I didn't quite find the characters interesting enough, unlike in Empire of Silence, where Hadrian is a really complex and fantastically written character, to think, okay, maybe there wasn't masses of plot, but the characters were good enough to get into my head and to therefore make me enjoy this book a lot. So I can understand this is a well-written book. I can understand why some people may enjoy it if they're not into kind of faster paced things that are going to grip me. I am quite a simple human being. I like a book to grip me, whether that is with its uniqueness, whether that's with its pace, with its action, with its humor, great characters, things like this. I'm not somebody who can sit and listen or read a book that's not got a lot going on and appreciate some of the nuances or some of the things that aren't quite as obvious. And that's what I felt like The God of the Woods was doing, unfortunately. So not a great experience with this book. I think, as I said, if you're a sort of person that likes it a bit slower, you may enjoy it. But if you're somebody that's looking for something a bit more fast paced, I would give this one a miss. So this is The God of the Woods by Liz Moore. Not talked about it as long as Empire of Silence because there's just not a lot to talk about without spoiling things. So very average, I would say. I'd probably give this one a 3.75 or a 4 out of 5 stars. I just didn't enjoy it too much. Unlike the next book I read, which was This Is How You Lose the Time War by Max Gladstone and Amal El Mokhtar. Now, this is actually a combination of writers. This was brilliant. Basically, this is a novella, a very short book. We are talking a book that is less than 200 pages here. It's about red and it's about blue, and they are involved in a time war. So basically they're involved in wars in different times, and they talk about their experiences of visiting certain eras at different times. One of them is kind of like, oh, you will experience this character in many iterations of him, and whatever iteration you come across, etc., because they're in parallel universes as well. So that aspect to me was quite clever. The other two things that I really, really enjoyed is this is a romance. There's no doubt about it. I am not a romance fan. Often romance is cheesy. Often you think it's gonna happen. It's obvious, it's very dull, they do this on, off, ooh, it's not gonna happen, it does happen. This is very different. This is very much a romance of kind of natural growth, rather than a lot of the romances I read, or I don't read a lot of romances, but I read where it's like, well, obviously that one, this is forced. Those two people are always gonna happen. This one feels very much like they're pulled together by something else. That I loved. Basically, they write letters to each other, or they write communications to each other. They are simply called Red and they are simply called Blue. They don't have proper names. I don't know if that is their names or whether it's their kind of, I don't know, poetic names. But it's just a story of them two and their experiences talking to each other in their letters and conversations with each other, whilst also some narrative around each other's journeys. Now, I've not explained it well because there's not a lot in here to try and explain without killing the plot. I really, really enjoyed it. Either way, I would highly, highly recommend it. As I said, it's really short, stunningly well written, really, really good. Almost the whole entire book felt poetic. At the start, I thought, oh gosh, this is going to be one of those books that's going to go right over my head. But if you can stick out for those first few pages, those first, I don't know, 20, 30, 40, 50 pages, and you're still immersed, you still understand who Red is and who Blue is and where they kind of sit within the story, then I can tell you and I can promise you now you're going to thoroughly enjoy this because it's such a fantastic little novella. So that's This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El Mokhtar and Max Gladstone, not Goldstone. That's something different entirely. Love this. I would give this 4.5, 4.75 out of 5 stars. Probably my favourite book of the month. Maybe, we'll see. So the only reason it might not be my favourite book of the month is because The Killer Question by Janice Hallett. Now this is a proof, so I'm going to show you the front cover often of a book that doesn't actually have a front cover at the moment. I can flip it around, however which version you want to see. Either way, you're not going to see a vast amount of design. But The Killer Question is the very latest in Janice Hallett's series of books. They're not series, there's no chronological order going on here, these aren't the same characters. But what I mean by that is she writes a very specific type of book. If you are new to my channel, you've never heard me talk about Janice Hallett before, I will try and describe once again how Janice Hallett books work. So basically the idea behind them, as you can see here, is she uses kind of email and she uses text and things like this as opposed to using traditional paragraph sentences format. So you kind of understand the story through interactions, through media, through the way that the characters kind of texted each other or emailed each other about a certain situation. And thus you kind of have to do a little bit of kind of imagination yourself. You have to pick up some of the gaps in the middle by yourself, which I really, really enjoyed. I thought was really, really exciting. I've loved all of Janice Hallett's books so far. Not only is that really interesting aspect of how they're written done well, the actual story within them and the plots and the twists and things like this that Janice managed to incorporate is fantastic. I'm such a fan of everything she writes. The Killer Question focuses on a group of pubs, but specifically one pub and the quiz that takes part there. One day, basically this pub quiz has been going on for ages and there is these kind of like leaders and these regular groups. A new group rocks up one day and then has this winning streak and is basically almost impeccable at winning. And the team that were winning before start to get quite upset about it. And then there is a murder in the local town of somebody that used to kind of attend the quiz but was a bit of a bumhead, keeping this channel PG, so therefore nobody was that bothered about. So basically the idea here is the story between the quizzers and then who find out who actually did the murders and who this team are that have rocked up as the new quiz team, and it's really, really good. Always love Janice Hallett's books. The ability for her to add personality to all of her characters because of the way she writes these is also fantastic and intriguing. I love the fact that she can literally have people text with like emojis or just respond K or put out big long text or make it sound like they're writing with AI. All this sort of stuff can be done because of the way that she's chosen to actually put these books onto a page, and thus I was a big fan. I wouldn't say The Killer Question is her best. That is a small thing I will say, but it did not stop me from enjoying it. I found it funny, I found it enjoyable, I found it British, which is a big part of her books as well. If you're British, there's so many things in here that'll make you laugh. If you think of that kind of Richard Osman British humour, loved it so much. So if you've already read any Janice Hallett, you'll enjoy this. If you've never read Janice Hallett, I would recommend you can start anywhere in her series. You don't have to start with her earliest ones. There's no chronological order. The only two books that link together are her very first book, The Appeal, and then she did a kind of mini version of that called The Christmas Appeal. Again, you wouldn't really need to have read The Appeal to get The Christmas Appeal, but either way, this is on its own. You don't need to have read the other ones. I loved this. This would be a 4.5 out of 5 stars for me. So that's The Killer Question by Janice Hallett. Then my penultimate book was The Secret of Secrets by Dan Brown. This rocked up because I pre-ordered it ages ago. I got a text or I got an email from Amazon saying, oh, your pre-order of Dan Brown's new book's coming out. This is the Robert Langdon series, so the Da Vinci Code, Angel and Demons, all of those massive bestseller, multi-billion selling books that came out. The idea here that Robert Langdon has come across something new that is this suspicious kind of conspiracy thing going on that he needs to go off and solve. The idea in here is about consciousness and the idea that you can control your consciousness from elsewhere and even potentially control other people's consciousness, and schizophrenia and things like this are all involved in this book. I enjoyed the book in a very basic sense. It feels like an action film. It feels like it jumps from one thing to the next very quickly, and you can skip between the scenes and you can pick up the characters very, very easily. You've got the cop, you've got the good guy, you've got the love interest, you've got like the tech person, all this sort of stuff. It's all very simple, not difficult to pick up, and feels very traditional in a classic 2000s kind of action film. However, this book is very, very long. So I've got the hardback copy here, so I'm not actually sure how many pages are in this one because I finished it on audiobook. So you're looking at over 600 pages in the hardback, which, considering this is bigger and bigger text, you're going to be looking at quite a lot in the paperback. The audiobook was over 20 hours long, so it was a long slog to listen to, and it did at times feel long. It could have been trimmed massively. It could have been trimmed by a lot to make this a much more appeasable and enjoyable book, really. If a lot of that had been cut out, there's a lot of stuff in here where it's kind of talking about things and expanding on things, and I almost feel like at times he repeats things, but I don't think he ever does. It just feels like he does because he talks about very, very similar things again. There is that intrigue that you get from the usual Dan Brown books and the Robert Langdon series, and that you're like, oh, that's cool, and there's a lot of history in here, and I love history, learning about these kind of conspiracy things and these mysteries and these things that have been discovered over the years that people aren't sure how they quite work, all this sort of stuff. All of that's in here. So if you love that aspect of the previous books, you'll still enjoy this, but do be wary. It's very, very long. It's, as I said, over 20 hours in the audiobook version and over 600 pages in this hardback. I don't know how many it's going to be in the paperback, but either way, just be wary of that. I would say it was fine. I wouldn't say it was brilliant. I'd probably give this like a 4 out of 5 stars. I wouldn't give it anything higher. I don't think it was anything worse. It's fine. It's a good old classic action book. If you're interested in the other stuff by him, Da Vinci Code, The Lost Symbol, Inferno, Origin, Angels and Demons are all on the back of the cover here, then you may enjoy this. But if you're looking for something quick, fun and easy, this is not the book for you. So that's The Secret of Secrets by Dan Brown. As I said, I'd probably give this a 4 out of 5 stars. And then the final book I read was The Mother by T.M. Logan. I picked this up simply because The Secret of Secrets had been such a long book. I needed something quick and easy and light that I didn't need to really think about to read. Now, this was very okay. Unfortunately, I think T.M. Logan and a lot of the books in his kind of genre fall into that kind of they're easy reads and thus they're never going to really blow you away. It takes a very, very rare read in this genre to actually blow my mind, and T.M. Logan's The Mother didn't do that. Basically, the idea is that the book starts off where this mum is in her house and then she wakes up and her husband has been killed, and then she is put in prison, and then 10 years later she comes out to try and prove to everybody she didn't do it, and it veils this bigger conspiracy, this government-led kind of conspiracy thing where there's these scary people out to get her ex-husband or whatever you want to call him, and thus her in trying to investigate, and then somebody tries to help her and she's not sure if that person's trying to help her or hinder her. Who knows? Either way, those aspects are quite cool, and I like the concept. That sounds quite cool. I imagine it being one of those Netflix series that's picked up kind of like all those others with Michelle Keegan in and Richard Armitage and stuff like that on Netflix. I imagine it being like that. I imagine it being quite enjoyable, and I imagine a certain audience on Netflix loving that sort of thing. Either way, I could see that being a fun thing. I just didn't think it was that great to read. It was fine. I'd probably give it a 3.75 out of 5 stars. As I said, the plot has an interest to it, but the characters weren't that interesting. There wasn't enough ingrained in them. There wasn't any kind of emotional pull into it. I didn't really care if she found her ex-husband. I didn't really care about her relationship with her 2 boys in the end. Unfortunately, that was probably the bit that was supposed to pull you in emotionally. The whole idea being that if she could get herself proven as not guilty, she would be able to spend time with them again. But I just didn't find myself caring, unfortunately. Whether that says more about me than it does the book, I don't know. But it was just fine, and I enjoy T.M. Logan. I follow him on social media, so I don't like to say anything bad about people that I enjoy as a human being as well as a writer, but it just wasn't for me. It's not a big thing. It was fun, and it was easy, and it was simple, and those are probably the best compliments I can give to it. So if you're a thriller fan, you may enjoy this. If thriller is the genre you read, you may enjoy this. I wouldn't say it's best work from T.M. Logan. I've read another of his that I enjoyed more, but I would say it's relatively enjoyable if thriller is your thing. But as I've read a vast amount of other kind of genres and other books and some fantastic pieces of work, this kind of sits mid to low on that kind of list of things. So that's The Mother by T.M. Logan. Apologies if you like this one. I hate bashing books, especially by authors that I enjoy as human beings on social media. Either way, that was the last book I read in September. So these are all the books that I read in September. It was a good reading month, 6 books. Big fan, especially the fact that there was some big, thick books in here. Empire of Silence wasn't small, Secret of Secrets wasn't small. Killer Question, I think I'd started a while ago and then finished off. That one wasn't long because it's as the way it's set out, you're plowing through pages. Either way, big fan of this reading month. I would say This Is How You Lose Time War was my favourite of the month. It was brilliant, so well written, so engrossing. I really find novellas difficult to get into, but I found that one fantastic. But let me know, have you read any of these books? Have you enjoyed any of them? Am I wrong in my opinions? Obviously, no one can be wrong in an opinion, but do you disagree with my opinion? Either way, if you're new here, subscribe. If you're old here, click like and drop a comment down below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video, and goodbye.